Keisha. Well, welcome everybody to this webinar on the Smarter Balanced Assessment Sample Items and Tasks in English Language Arts and Literacy. My name is Jacqueline King, and I'm Director of Higher Education Collaboration for Smarter Balanced. I'm joined by Barbara Kapinus, who's our Director of English Language Arts and Literacy, and by Amy Allers from WestEd, who is helping to manage the logistics for today's webinar. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. As Keisha, the operator, just noted, your phones are on mute, but we certainly do welcome your questions. There's just too many folks on the phone to have everyone with a live phone line. So if you look at the webinar screen in the bottom right-hand corner, you should see a box labeled chat. At the bottom, it'll say, you'll see send to with a drop-down menu. If you scroll all the way to the top of that drop-down, you will see that you can send to everyone. Any questions that you have, please type them then into the box and hit send, and I will see them. There are about 130 people signed up for this webinar, so I don't know if we'll get to every single question, but we'll do our best to respond to as many as possible. If you're experiencing a logistical problem or a technical problem, you can either press *0 on your phone, or if you would like to, right below everyone is Amy's name as the host, and you can send her a note and she may be able to answer your technical question. So with that, we'll get started. Our agenda for our time together is to provide you with some context on Smarter Balanced, to sort of orient you to what Smarter Balanced is and to the assessment system that we are building, and then I'll do that, and then I'm going to turn things over to Barb, who is going to talk about some about the test design, and really then walk you through our sample items, which are available now for you to continue viewing at your leisure at the Smarter Balanced website. So with that, let's get started. So the first question, obviously, what is Smarter Balanced? It's not just a buttery spread that you've seen on your supermarket shelves. It is also a consortium of 25 states that are working together to build next-generation formative, interim, and summative assessments for K-12 schools that are tied to the Common Core State Standards in English Language Arts and Mathematics. When the Stimulus Act was put together, you'll recall that funds were set aside for the Race to the Top grant program for states. A portion of that money was set aside for consortia of states to build assessments linked to the Common Core Standards. Smarter Balanced was one of 2 assessment consortia that were each awarded about $175 million from the federal government to build these assessments. We also have about $3 million in foundation support. And we're governed by the member states on a consensus model. So this really is a state-led process. The states make the decisions about what the assessment system should look like. And most of the work is really done by volunteers from K-12 and higher education with the assistance of a small central staff that includes Barb and myself. We also have a project management partner that assists us with our work, and that's WestEd, where Amy is based. These are the states in the consortium. 21 states are governing for our advisory. The governing states have agreed that they will use the assessments. The advisory states are still making up their minds. We have K-12 and higher education representatives from each state that are actively engaged with the consortium. So these are K-12 tests. So why do they matter to higher ed? Why is higher education involved? Well, in large part because the Common Core State Standards are really anchored in expectations for college readiness. The standards begin with the expectations articulated by college and university faculty like yourselves about what students need to know and be able to do to be successful in entry-level credit-bearing courses. The standards were then back-mapped from those college readiness expectations to the individual grade levels. When Smarter Balanced, when the consortium of states applied for the federal grant, one stipulation in the grant program was that higher education be asked to participate in the design of the assessments with the goal of recognizing the 11th grade exam as evidence of college readiness. So we really are not just talking about the expectations, but really giving students a sense that if they perform well on this assessment, there's going to be real consequences for them, positive consequences for them in higher education. They will know that they're ready for credit-bearing coursework and that they will not need remedial or developmental coursework when they get to college. And the biggest reason is that the Common Core standards and all the related reforms that are connected to really changing the way that instruction happens in K-12 provide an incredible opportunity for higher education to improve the readiness of the students as they enter our campuses, reduce the amount of remediation that we have to do, and improve our own completion rates. So as a result, Common Core, the standards, and the assessments are essential components of the completion agenda. Standards anchor the K-12 experience in the real-world expectations of colleges and employers. They remove guesswork for teachers and schools. Up until now, teachers didn't really know what colleges expected, and they were guessing. And in many cases, research has shown us over and over that there was a real mismatch between what teachers thought they should be teaching and what colleges wanted students to know. The standards and assessment allows schools, parents, and students to track student progress and track it consistently as if they move from state to state or district to district. Most importantly, these assessments will identify students who need assistance while they're still in high school, in the 11th grade or in earlier grades, so that students can get the help they need, address any academic deficiencies, and hopefully not need remedial courses when they get to college. I just want to acknowledge that these assessments are only one element of a broader implementation agenda for higher education with regard to the Common Core standards. Of course, teacher and school leader preparation and professional development are key. That's the one piece that most people immediately identify. Also really important to articulate clear expectations, and the assessments are part of that. Course requirements and other kinds of admissions criteria can also be a piece of that. Aligning curricula, both for general education courses so that there's a seamless transition into higher education, but also for adult and developmental education. These will be part of the agenda as the Common Core really takes hold in our schools, and we start to see in higher education a real difference in the instruction students have received during their K-12 experience. As I mentioned earlier, one of the primary benefits of the Common Core state standards is that they will, and the assessments, is that they will identify students early who need additional help. And there's a great opportunity for K-12 and higher education to work together to design and implement interventions that can help those students while they're still in high school. And last but not least, the new standards require new curricular materials, and there's a great opportunity for faculty to help design new curricular materials for use in K-12 schools. So narrowing our focus down to the assessments, I want to contrast the way that readiness testing happens today at most colleges and universities and the vision that we have at Smarter Balanced for the future. Today, each college or university system sets its own standards and selects its own measures. K-12 has no information about what those standards are. Students don't know about placement tests and typically don't prepare for them. In most cases, the predictive validity of the test is unknown. In some places, careful empirical studies are done to select the optimal cut score and then to continually test that. But that is the exception and not the rule. In most places, it's a faculty judgment about where the cut score should be, and there's very little empirical research to go back and test that and make sure that the levels are set appropriately. And most importantly, students who took the courses they were told to take, passed them, took all the assessments they were told to take in K-12 and did okay on them, can find out when they've already arrived on college and university campuses that they actually have fallen short and need remediation. So what's our vision for the future? Well, the Smarter Balanced Assessments are going to be designed around known, agreed-upon standards, the Common Core State Standards. The proficiency standards, those cut scores, will be set through an open process with substantial higher ed involvement. Everyone, the students, the teachers, the parents, are going to know what the expectations are. And students will be able to address their deficiencies while they're still in high school. I just want to pause for a moment. Please, if you have questions, questions from multiple sources. Can I get a copy of these PowerPoint slides? Thank you very much. We will put a recording of this whole webinar, so you'll have not just the slides but also the audio on our website, smarterbalance.org. And that will take a couple of days. If you check back next week on the Smarter Balance website, that will be there. So please look for that on our website next week. Here's the design of the total assessment system. Today we'll really be focusing on the summative assessment. That's the end-of-year assessment, which in grade 11 will signal college readiness. But summative assessment is just one piece of a tripartite system. It starts with an online resource bank of formative assessment practices and professional development materials to help teachers really do a better job of formative assessment in their classrooms and give them some professionally designed resources to help them do that. Next, there's also an interim assessment, which is draws from our same item bank, same kinds of items and tasks that we're designing for the summative assessment that you'll see when Barb walks us through the online tool, but that will be non-secure and flexible so that teachers will be able to design assessments around specific standards. So if, for example, a teacher is really focusing in on a close reading of text, let's say, in grade 8, well, she could pull a set of items that would assess that skill for that grade level, just specifically. The interim assessment also will be, if it's administered as a full assessment, can look very much like the summative and can be predictive of the summative. So if school districts want to take sort of a mid-year reading, kind of do a midterm, to see how it looks like students are going to do on the end-of-year assessment, they can also use the interim tool for that. The summative assessment is the piece that we'll spend more time on today. It has two main purposes. A primary purpose, which is very traditional to K-12 assessments, is for accountability at the state, district, school, and in some states at the classroom or teacher level. So results reported in the aggregate, and consequences really accruing to the adults as opposed to the kids. But it also has, because of this college readiness piece, a unique feature, which is that we will also be providing accurate information about individual students' achievement, growth over time, and in 11th grade, their readiness for college in English and mathematics. So while the younger kids, we all know kind of that the younger kids may try hard on the test because their teachers asked them to do that, those teenagers, they want to know what's in it for them. And in this case, we have a good answer. If they perform well on the assessment, if the colleges and universities join into this, as we have every expectation that they will, those students will know that they are ready for credit-bearing coursework and that they won't have to take developmental courses. The benefits, and really one of the main reasons that the consortium formed, is that by banding states together and taking advantage of this federal cash to support research and development, we're going to be able to build a far more sophisticated and comprehensive measure of student knowledge and skills than most existing K-12 accountability or placement exams can offer. And I hope you'll see that and recognize that when we start to look at some of the sample items and tasks. There are some limitations that are important to recognize. The summative assessment offered at the end of the year is not diagnostic in nature. The Common Core state standards are substantial enough that an exam that could pinpoint, that could offer enough items related to each standard that it could pinpoint exactly where students are missing the mark would be an enormously long and prohibitively long examination. So the summative assessment is not diagnostic in nature. However, the interim tool that can be offered throughout the year does allow teachers to drill down into specific standards and understand more about student performance at that finer level of detail. The other thing to note is that we are not measuring some of the most advanced mathematics that typically require 12th grade instruction, since this test will be offered at the end of the 11th grade. The summative assessment is a two-pronged approach. The first is a computer adaptive test. Computer adaptive testing is an important development in the technology of assessment. It really allows for a much more efficient and accurate measurement of student performance, particularly at the tails of the distribution. For the high-performing student, the test adjusts for each based on student performance. So if a student gets a question right, the next question, the level of difficulty is ratcheted up a little bit. So for the highest performing students, they won't sort of quickly run through all of the items and be done. And you don't really know how much they actually do know. You only know that, well, they answered these questions correctly. You don't know what other questions they could have answered beyond those that were on the test. So at the high end, it's very helpful. Conversely, at the lower end of the performance distribution, students will continue to see items that challenge them but are not way beyond their level. So for a poor performing student, they won't look at a test and say, I don't know how to answer one of these questions. The assessment, if they're not getting questions right, will ratchet down the level of difficulty so that we can really understand what they can do, not just what they can't do, which is what we find out now on traditional assessments. The assessment will measure student achievement and growth over time, so we'll be able to show progress and measure progress year over year. And as you'll see from Barb, it offers a lot of different question types that she'll go into in greater detail. Paired with the computer adaptive test is our performance tasks. And I know she'll go into details on those, so I won't belabor that now. But that's a very exciting part of the assessment design. So what are our goals for higher education? They are that colleges and universities recognize the assessment, the grade 11 assessment, as a valid measure of readiness as defined by the Common Core state standards. And you'll see I said content readiness. That's because we recognize that there are many other elements of college readiness that extend beyond skills in English language arts and mathematics. And so we're being pretty specific about what this test measures, and we don't want to overpromise that it's going to measure other skills or dispositions that aren't part of the Common Core. That colleges and universities agree on a common performance standard for college readiness. That's a big change for higher education. We're used to each campus or each system setting its own placement levels. But this would be a level above which no student would be denied credit-bearing coursework. So nothing that says a student who scored lower couldn't also be placed into credit-bearing courses if that was a college's choice, but those students would know that at that performance level, they've done well enough that they won't be placed into remediation. Higher education is involved in a lot of different ways in helping to build this assessment. They have played a lead role in coming up with an operational definition of college and career readiness, which we're going to be releasing for public comment later, in about 2 weeks, on the 12th of November, to the states and then to the general public shortly after Thanksgiving. So they've been very engaged in helping us to set these policies. At the state level, higher education and K-12 are collaborating on high school curricula and changes in teaching to accommodate the new demands of the Common Core standards. Higher ed is very involved in helping to build the assessments, and as I've mentioned, to design interventions for students who need to address their academic deficiencies, as well as for those who are on track or maybe even ahead. So I've talked a lot about what is expected of higher education. I want to focus on what is not expected, because that's just as important. We're not expecting that these assessments will be used for admission. They're not designed as admission tests. The goal is not to replace the SAT or the ACT or any other measures that colleges or universities may use for admission. Likewise, there's no expectation of standardization of admissions criteria or standards. Colleges will continue to admit students the way they always have. The issue here is placement into a freshman level course. And if we think about this a little bit more broadly, if you think about this in the context of articulation agreements, we already accommodate the fact that different colleges do things in slightly different ways through our transfer and articulation agreements. And this is really extending that back to K-12 and articulating our expectations from higher ed in a way that K-12 can work with them. We're not asking for standardization of curricula or for complete reliance on the Smarter Balance assessment. We fully expect that colleges will want to evaluate multiple measures, other assessments, course grades, course-taking patterns, and that further testing might be necessary for students who either want to proceed to more advanced courses or for students who aren't yet college ready to help determine what their developmental needs are. And my last slide is just to give you a little sense of the timeline for the rollout of the Smarter Balance system. So if I've mentioned to you this development of a college content readiness policy. We've also had higher ed and K-12 collaborating this month on achievement level descriptors. These are text descriptions of the aggregate achievement levels on the assessment. What does it mean for if a student is, for example, considered to be at the proficient level? What does that mean in terms of the actual content of the assessment? There's going to be a draft, as I've mentioned, that will come out next month for review and comment through middle of January, and then states will be taking a vote on that in March. We're going to be doing, also in February and March, we'll be doing pilot testing around the country of the assessment, and full-scale field testing will follow in the spring of 2014. Summer 2014 is when we'll set those all-important cut scores through a standard-setting process, and the test will be operational in schools in the 2014-15 academic year. So for those 11th graders, they will enter higher education, sort of first class of kids who have taken the Smarter Balanced exams in the fall of 2016. So that's the timeline that we see. I've thrown a lot of information at you. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat feature. We can always roll backwards and pick any of those up. At this time, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Barb Kapinus, our Director of English Language Arts and Literacy, who's going to give you more detail on the assessment and get to the fun part of showing you the items and tasks.
Am I on?
You are on, Barb.
Okay. I didn't know whether I had been unmuted. Okay, great. Thank you, and thank you, everybody, for being a part of this afternoon, because it is essential that even if you know some things about the standards and Smarter Balanced, I think each time we all listen to pieces of it, we come to a better and deeper understanding of it. The item development process for the assessment encompassed early 2012, before I was even on board in the project. We developed assessment claims for English language arts, literacy, and mathematics and approved them. And those claims are essentially, in English language arts, 4 general statements. One is about reading, one is about writing, one is about listening and speaking, and one is about research. And I won't go into depth now, but basically it says kids can read well. They can write well, they can listen and speak well, and they can do research. Then we began to link some specifications to those and review some guidelines. And in the specifications, we developed what we call targets. And so when people wrote items, they wrote them to a target. And a target, and I'll show you an example in a minute, but a target essentially will encompass multiple standards, because if you try to write a separate item for every standard, you'll go crazy. And we would have had a test that would have lasted a month. The other thing is that the standards, the character of the standards is such that usually when you're addressing one standard, you are addressing several others also at the same time. So that there's a standard for students gathering information from multiple texts to write or speak knowledgeably about a topic. Well, okay, so to gather the information, there's inferences, there's key details, there's general ideas. All of those are standards that are, if you look at a vertical set of the standards for grade 5 from which that standard comes, you'll see that those standards are related to that big gathering information standard. And in addition, there are, of course, writing standards or speaking standards that are hooked to that. So the nature of the standards themselves is that when you have a task, you're usually addressing multiple standards. But we try to translate those tasks into what we call targets. We developed training modules for the item writers and reviewers, and then educators from some of the governing states began to write items this summer. We began to produce items for cognitive labs to study how the items work. We produced items for a field test to look at how the scoring and the computer aspects work, and we are in the middle of producing the pilot test for the first 10,000 items. It's reduced now to closer to about 6,000 or 8,000, but nevertheless, it's a huge number of items for the pilot test. Okay, next slide. We developed the sample item to show the rigor and complexity of what we're doing with the Smarter Balanced assessment. and to also signal to educators some of the shifts in instruction that will be required to help students meet the demands of the Common Core and new assessments. And people have been talking about the instructional shifts a lot, but it's not until you look at what we're going to ask kids to do on an assessment that you get a real clear picture of what your goals are going to be. And we also wanted to showcase a variety of the items that we have, such as selected response, constructed response, technology enhanced, and performance tasks. Next slide, please. As you look at the sample items, and I'm going to walk you through some of this, but you can get them online through a simulated test platform. So it'll be a little bit like you can get whether or not your answer is correct as long as it's a selected response. And the constructed response, you'll see what the rubric is for the responses to that. And we've done the items in grade bands, so there'll be some items in grade bands 3 to 5, some in 6 to 8, and some in high school. You'll see the content claims, whether it's reading, writing, and so forth. And then the type of task, and some of the themes illustrating learning progressions and difficulty progression. So there's kind of a metadata piece about each item, the grade level, the content claim, the assessment target. I just talked about the target, the standard, and it's critical. We're never leaving the standards behind. So every item we write, every item we review, every item we put up, there you can trace it back from the claim to the target to the standard. And then there's a brief description and scoring rubric. And there's a place for online feedback and phone support if you have trouble getting to the item. All right, next slide, please. An important thing to remember right now when you look at the sample of items is that we have not dealt at this point with accessibility and accommodation. Now we're going to be working on that, and we have several working groups and committees that are in the process of developing the guidelines, and we're talking about what kinds of supports and scaffolding and adaptations need to be made for special populations. But for the first pushing out of sample items, we just wanted people to kind of see the range of items and the types of things we were asking, and we felt like it was important to get something out for people to not only look at but to respond to. And it's going to take a while to work through all of the issues and the demands for accessibility and accommodation. Next slide, please. This is just the rollout of the sample items, generally telling you, how they're kind of coming forward. This is a critical piece for the sample items, especially in English language arts, and I like to put this up in the front because we have a commitment to several things, and one is text-worth reading. And I can't tell you how many texts we reviewed and said, this is not, I would never have kids in my class read this, so it's not going to work. We also want questions worth answering, so we don't want just a question to get a data point on the test. We really want to ask whether they're worth answering, and I see who decides what texts are worth reading. Well, we have a lot of teacher reviewers and content experts from our member states who've been they did an extensive review of every single stimulus passage that was used. So they were the ones that said, this is not even worth his time. And then we're committed to text-dependent questions. For example, a non-text-dependent question would be, what experience of your own does this story remind you of? And that kind of question, which really doesn't demand going back into the text for some kind of support. So you can ask kids to stem the text, but every extension of the text has to be grounded in the text. We want the items to demonstrate a range of thinking, and we have the indicators of that called depth of knowledge. Those are numbers. The explanation is in the item, the content specifications that are on the Smarter Balanced website. They were developed, the ones that we use for English Language Arts were developed by Karen Wixon working with Norm Webb. We want as much as possible to have some real 21st century context. The very fact that the test is administered on a computer platform puts us to the 21st century situation. We want this test to be untimed, and we sort of, as we design the test, we put some time frames on things so we have a ballpark figure. But you can't have this thoughtful revisiting of text or thoughtful looking at, you know, a set of resources to include in your writing if you are having kids race the clock in their tasks. So it is essentially untimed. We're trying to contextualize writing with requirements to use information from multiple texts. And again, so there's more writing using information that's given to them. In some cases, we give them the information to see how well they use it in their writing. Sometimes there's a little bit of information given just to sort of level the playing field for the kids in their writing. And we've included tasks that address literacy in a range of domains. So there are tasks that ask kids to read or write about history, science, other social studies, economics. So those are kind of different things that we try to cover, and that's reflective to a great degree of those English Language Arts standards for grades 6 through 12, which talk about reading and writing in science, social studies, and technology. Next slide, please. Okay, the assessment targets that I mentioned before, they describe the kind of evidence that we're going to use. So they don't replace the standards. I can't say that enough. But rather, they reference specific standards at each grade level that test developers will use to guide the item and task development. And you can find those targets laid out on the website in the content specification. And when you look at so you'll see something, though, in the metadata for the sample that says target, and that's what that refers to. Let's see, each assessment target's accompanied by related standards, so, and usually it's more than one standard. And the depth of knowledge, and we're still playing with the depth of knowledge or rigor, and it's an interesting area, but what it does make us do at this point is make sure that there's a range of types of thinking and kind of cognitive difficulty across the various items in the assessment. Next slide, please. Okay, here's claim 1, and the claim 1 is the reading claim. Students can read closely and analytically to comprehend a range of increasingly complex literary and informational text. Now, next slide will show the targets 1 to 7. Targets 1 to 7 correspond with literary text. Next one, targets 8 to 14 correspond to informational text. That means target 1, go back 1 for just a second. Target 1 in literary text is key details. Target 8 in informational text is also key details. So they're parallel, they line up, they're the same, but it's just a little bit of a different description of those targets for the different kinds of text that kids are reading in. All right, now the next slide. So here we have a grade 4 example. It's claim 1, and there you have the claims. Students can read closely and analytically to comprehend a range of increasingly complex literary and informational texts. Then you have a target. This is target 4 for grade 4. Use supporting evidence to justify or explain inferences, such as character development, so on and so on. Now, then you have the third green dot, are the Common Core standards related to this particular target. And these are grade 4 standards. So grade 4 standard reading for in literary text is the theme, determine the theme of a story, drama, or poem, from details in the text and summarize the text. And then go on reading in literary text. Standard 3 for 4th grade, describe in depth a character, setting, or event in a story, and so forth. So that's just to give you an idea of how the little pieces interact. And as you can imagine, it's been a challenge both for the people writing the items and the people reviewing the items to check all of these pieces and make sure that they all line up, and that ultimately they go from the actual item back down here to the very specific standards that should be covered in the item. Next slide, please. Okay, and you can put the other one in there. I believe there we go. Okay, so we start with the Common Core standards. Then we have our content specifications that I've mentioned. You'll find those on the website. Then we have the item and task specifications, which says more specifically, this is the kind of item that you can have, or these are the kinds of things we'll ask kids to do. And then we actually have the items themselves, and we have the actual performance task. Next slide, please. Another target, reasoning and evaluation, grade 5. Let's skip this. Next slide. Again, a sample of the standards it relates to. Next slide.
That might be your last one, Barb.
Oh, that's my last one. Oh, goody. Okay, so that's the background. And now what I'd like to do is go to the website and show you a couple of things on the website.
So, Barb, we've gotten a bunch of questions come in.
So that's right. We've got some questions, yes.
Yep, which is great. So it's going to take a moment here for
while you're getting
the
platforms changed, yes.
Yep. So while we do that, I'm gonna just see if there's a few of these I can field, and some I'm gonna send to you. And I apologize in advance. We've gotten so many questions in. I don't know that we'll get to all of them.
Yeah, I can see.
Let's see what we can quickly address. So somebody asked a question about how the Smarter Balanced exam fits in with other tests that a state may offer. So these tests will replace whatever the state is using now for its No Child Left Behind accountability testing. So it's not an additional test, it's a replacement for whatever the state is doing for accountability testing. If the state also, for example, pays for students to take one of the admissions tests, which a number of states do, they may continue to do that. That's an internal state policy decision. Those tests typically are not, do not qualify for use for No Child Left Behind accountability, so they're usually offered above and beyond whatever the accountability testing is. A couple of folks that mentioned, well, you know, this whole notion of, gosh, having one placement standard. You know, colleges and universities are so different. They have different resources, and you know, how do we square the circle between the diversity of higher education and this notion of a consistent standard for credit-bearing courses? And that is a challenging question. I think what I come back to is a couple of things. One, admissions criteria will continue to be as diverse as they are today. So, you know, there's going to continue to be students at selective institutions who don't qualify for admission, and that is a level of diversity that continues. to the extent that currently we accept courses for transfer, we already implicitly but not explicitly square ourselves with the fact that there are differences between colleges and universities. So when a research university accepts the community college's course for transfer, they are saying that this is consistent enough for us. So while there still is a range, we can bracket that range within some consistent expectations about what we want students to know to be ready for entry-level courses. And actually, when states have done this, when they've gotten college and university faculty together and they actually put their syllabi on the table and start talking about the courses, their entry-level courses, they actually find that the similarities far outweigh the differences, and the differences usually are really around the margins. And lastly, having a consistent set of expectations provides so much useful information to teachers. Teachers and schools can't possibly contend with as many different standards of readiness as there are colleges in their state. They have to have a target to shoot at, and this gives them a consistent target. So it is a big change in mindset from how we work in higher education. I fully appreciate that, and I think we all do in Smarter Balanced, and we wrestle with it. This is not easy stuff. And we really have tried, and I hope when you see the college readiness policy, and we've tried to build in as much flexibility as possible, while at the same time preserving this notion of providing schools with a consistent set of expectations. Let's see.
Okay. So let me just mention just a couple of things, Jackie. One is there's a question here about math, and that's a math question. So I'm going to focus mainly on English language arts.
Sure.
The second thing is to remember that we are looking at what kinds of adaptations and what kinds of extra support kids with IEPs need to have. So that would hopefully colleges would be looking at how to help those students, survive in class and what they need for that kind of support. The other thing, a third thing, is to kind of reiterate what you said, Jackie, and that is that this is about content, knowledge, and skills. It does not tell you whether the kids have the disposition and the habits of mind that will make them successful in college. So that's a whole other piece right there. And then I think I saw something about the long-term projects, and most of that will be covered in the online library, the digital library that we will begin to develop probably later this winter, early spring, and that will it will have resources for professional development, and it will have resources for teachers to use in formative assessment activities. So those, and it will also have resources for extended projects and performances that are related, so teachers can see how those possibilities relate to the standards, to the targets, and ultimately to performance on the summative assessment also.
Let's see, there were questions.
You want to talk, Jackie, do you want to mention ALDs again? Because they asked about, who decides.
Sure. So really the decisions, all the major decisions, all the decisions in Smarter Balanced are really made ultimately by the states, but most of the detail work, so for example, when you're looking at thinking about who picks texts, well, educators, primarily K-12 teachers, are really our frontline troops in terms of building the assessment. So these are educators making professional judgments, and then there's levels of review. So if if there's disagreement about whether or not a text is appropriate, then that gets addressed through those review processes. But it really is educators making most of those kinds of decisions as the assessment is being built. Likewise, the achievement level descriptors, those were teams of K-12 and higher ed faculty who drafted the achievement level descriptors that will be released in November for extensive public comment, and then revised based on that. I'm just scrolling through here to see if there's any. One person asked, this is a relatively simple one, what about homeschool, charter school, and private schools? Smarter Balanced Assessment is really, the primary purpose is for public schools. States are having conversations about access for private and charter schools as well. That's really going to be a state-level decision. While the federal government is picking up the tab for the research and development, the administrative costs to implement the assessment are borne by the states. Somebody did ask about the formative bank will be available, openly available, and the interim assessment does have a small additional charge above the summative assessment. The original cost estimates that we put forward, which we are going to be revising, and which will probably come down, was $20 per student for the summative assessment and about $7.50 for the interim assessment. Let's see. Translation. We are not considering translation into other languages for the English Language Arts exam. We are considering selective translation in the mathematics exam, and we actually in November will be convening a group of mathematics faculty to advise us on that. At this point, we are pretty sure that there'll be some level of translation in Spanish and in American Sign Language. Beyond that, no decisions have been made about other languages. Let's see, other questions. Question here, I'm not sure I understand. Maybe, Barb, you do. Are there plans to release more grade levels other than 4, 8, and 11 for claims 2, 3, and 4? I can only find those grade levels for claims beyond 1.
More samples. There should be samples. For all of the claims. Maybe not the. Oh, okay, let me help. Claim 3, which is the which is the listening claim. I believe we don't have anything there right now for the other grades. For the research claim, you'll see there are every single one of the research or the performance tasks have sample items that relate to the research claim. And when I talk through the task, I'll show you how that works. But right now, we probably are not going to be spending a whole lot of time immediately trying to develop more sample items simply because we are crushed with the necessity to develop and review all the items for the pilot test, which will be given starting in February. So that's sort of first priority, and then my guess is that we'll go back and we'll be revising our plans for the assessment to some extent based on the data that we get from both from the cognitive labs, from the field test, and from the pilot. So we'll be gathering information, and we're already getting information just looking at what's been produced. When we finally begin to see what kids are doing in response to these items, we'll have even more information. So I think we will be revising and adding to the sampler as we go along, but it's not like first on the plate. Don't expect to see anything in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
One last question, then I think we need to get to the sample items, the fun part. So somebody asked about, well, how is this going to, this notion of a consistent standard, how's that going to affect, in particular, community colleges, where there's already, a high concentration of students who need developmental education. Really, I think community colleges have been some of the most enthusiastic participants in this work because they see the biggest upside in improved student preparation and in that happening more consistently across school districts around the country. So they're some of our most engaged and enthusiastic supporters of this work. In the near term, I think what we will see is a lot more students who have been told, well, you're fine, you're passing your classes, you're fine, and then they find out when they get to community college that they are not fine and that they need remediation. Those students will get that information sooner. Hopefully they can start to address some of those developmental needs right away in high school. But this is going to take some time for the effects of the Common Core really to take hold. In 14, 15, those are going to be students who have had 1 or at the most 2 years of instruction that's really been informed by the standards. So we fully expect to see the proficiency rates on these in states where maybe now they say 70 or 80% of students are proficient. We expect those numbers to drop dramatically and come much more in line with the percentages of students who don't need remediation. So proficiency rates on the state accountability, from a state accountability perspective, and the rates of students who can proceed directly into credit-bearing courses, we expect those to come into alignment, which will mean a big change for K-12 in terms of the kinds of results that they're used to seeing. All right, with that, Amy, are you ready?
Wait, Jackie, just a minute. Let me just say, I just noticed this about education being handled by the Constitution, being handled by states. What's the role of states and local people? But the Smarter Balanced is run by states, and the governing states are the ones that essentially put a stamp of approval on all the major pieces, such as the overall design of the assessment. So it is state-controlled. It's the states that have decided, one, whether to even buy into the assessment, and then on the second level, once they have bought in and become part of the consortium, they are part of the decision-making body. So this is not a separate organization making these decisions. It's not the federal government. It really is a consortium of states, and a huge amount of the work done in the consortium is done by state-level people in state departments of ed, places like that. So it's very much state-driven. So the decisions sort of upholds the constitutional role of the states in education.
Thanks, Barb. Amy, are you ready to move us to the website? Look at that.
There it is.
Yeah,
terrific.
There it is.
Okay. So Amy is kind enough to show us this little pull-down box. Amy, go back in so they can see where it is. Okay, see where it says View More? Okay, go ahead and pull it down again. And in this one, it tells you it gives you the overall layout of what's here for English language arts. So you can filter these by the technology, whether it's technology enhanced, whether it's a performance task, whether you can look at the connections across grades and some difficulty progression. There's a piece that says, first of all, stay here. All right. First of all, look down and you'll see grade bands. And then you see, as you look across from grade band, you'll see the big claim areas: reading, writing, speaking and listening, and research inquiry. And then you see performance tasks, kind of its own separate category. We are not assessing speaking at this point, and I can tell you folks that it has been an interesting enough challenge trying to deal with how we are going to assess listening with all kinds of concerns in terms of making sure that what we have is a valid set of evidence about kids' ability to comprehend what they hear. Anyway, and then you will see the reading is grouped under passages that have a name. So this is just an example of a passage. Some of our passages are commissioned and some are permissioned. It'll just be a combination of those. However, I will tell you that many of the commissioned passages are written by very well-known authors that write for basal companies and, have written, award-winning books. So it's not as if these are people just writing just for the test. Then you will see that we have some writing examples in here. Then we only have for grade 4 the listening exercise. Research and inquiry is incorporated, and I'll show you in a minute, into the performance task. So if you'll go to Grandma Ruth 3, okay, and Grandma Ruth is a nice passage. Actually, it's kind of a complex text because it's the first part is about a girl needing to play catch with her dog, and she doesn't have a ball. Her brother won't let her have it, so she goes into the closet, the back of her grandmother's closet, and she knows there's a shoebox of baseballs there, and she gets one out and uses it. And then at dinner, the grandmother says, "Oh, I'm going to tell you how I got my name, Grandma Ruth. She's named after Babe Ruth." And she tells the story. At any rate, so there's a story within the story, which makes it a little bit more complex as a text for 4th grade. In this particular item, we give them the piece of text again. Now, if we wanted to make this item more difficult, we could ask kids to search the entire text for 3 sentences that show that Naomi is worried that she has done something wrong. But we do have research that indicates that the amount of text that kids have to search through and deal with has a big impact on their success in terms of showing their ability to comprehend the text. So we've given them some scaffolding here by giving them the part of the text where we want them to look. They just simply highlight the sentence. And let's see. I don't know. I can't do it because I didn't do it on my machine. But anyway, why don't you go, Amy, can you highlight I tried to swallow but couldn't in that text there? Yeah, there. Good. And then, let's see, down here at the end, my grandma pulled paragraph, I began to shake inside. No, not that one. Well, you can do that one because we'll see what happens. And then there's a sentence that says, I began to shake inside at the end of that. Yes. So, and then click up to the score, item score. Up, yeah. All right. So in this case, the students did not get all 3 pieces, so they have a score of 0. So you can see what the score is right there. Okay, and if we can go back, then let's go back up to about this item. And oh, I do have to say that there are 4 possibilities for answers in that item. So it's a kind of selected response, but it doesn't have just one right answer because kids can use several combinations to get to the answer. All right, and then about this item, you see it's grade 4. You see the claim that I talked about. You see the target key details that I talked about. And then what I'd like you don't need to see the rubric on this because you just saw the scoring thing, but view text complexity analysis placemat. I just want you to see what we do when we look at a piece of text. We use these placemats that Student Achievement Partners and a consortium of states working through CCSS have developed. And so we look at a range of measures of complexity. There are 3 different, under the red band, quantitative measures. There are 3 different scores that are looked at. And then we have a whole list of qualitative measures. And then we have other considerations like, you know, background knowledge about baseball, some higher level vocabulary, implied meaning throughout. So those are the various ways that we take a look at a text and think about its appropriateness for a particular grade level. Okay, if you can go back now to the little pull-down menu, let's go to Writing Oliver. Yes. This is a writing item. It's what we call a brief write. There's a little passage here, and then we ask the kids to write an ending for the story, adding some details about what happens next. So we're specifically prompting them to make sure to include details. And you can show them the go back to About This Item and show them the rubric right now. Okay, so this is the rubric right now. However, we are in the process of exploring whether we can score some of these brief writes, or even ideally all of these brief writes, using AI scoring. And in this case, it would be probably a propositional scoring that would be based on the kinds of answers that we get from actual students. And then we would train the computer to recognize, you know, the things that are appropriate in the response. So you can go back now to the pull down. And there's a different kind of writing task here under School Day. And in this one, the students are asked, they're given a draft paragraph, but they say it needs more details. And they give them a sample school schedule to use to think about what kinds of details they might add to the paragraph to make it, you know, more compelling as you talk about reasons for having a longer school day. So again, it's revision, and as opposed to a brief write, but we're giving kids some sort of grist to base their writing on. Okay, then if you go back to the pull down, thank you. Let's go to Listening and Speaking, Exercise in Space 2. You've got it. Now, Exercise in Space has a video, and I believe there is a video. There's supposed to be a video on the website that you can actually play, but when we try to play it in webinars, it's not good. So we're going to skip playing it. But at any rate, here is an example of a listening item. Use 2 details from the video. Explain why exercise is important for astronauts while they're in space. Use 2 details from the video to support your answer. Now, what we've done, the reason we have some videos, and where we don't have videos, we will frequently have PowerPoint, because we know that some students, especially younger students, and we're really very concerned about the younger students. Older students may have IEPs that address their need for support in short-term memory weighted contexts. But for young students, they really, we believe they need some scaffolding, some pictures. So the content is not carried in the video. or in the PowerPoints or the pictures or the visuals, but the content, but it just helps the kids understand what's being talked about in the audio part. You can pull down about this item, and you can see that it is now claim 3, which is effective speaking and listening. It's listen, interpret and use information delivered orally or audio visually. And there is you can show people the rubric, if you will, Amy. Okay. So it's a pretty straightforward rubric with 2 points. And the rubrics right now, of course, are very general because we will be doing some range finding week after next to begin to put some meat on the rubrics. Okay, back to the pull down, please. And let's do, I want to skip way over to nuclear power, which is the high school performance task. And I want to talk a little bit about the performance task so you can get a feel for them. So the performance task, if you look up here at the top, it says task overview, and then there's what they call a classroom activity. This will now be 30 minutes, and it's really to level the playing field, give kids who may not have a lot of background knowledge about the topic a chance to access at least some knowledge about the topic that isn't dependent totally on reading. So there's a discussion, and then there are 2 parts to the student task. One is the research. There are research questions, and the second part is to actually do a piece of research, and they're given a context. So I'll explain that just a little bit more. If you'll go to page 9 here on this, we give the kids these 2 visuals for the classroom task. And there's a series, well, first of all, I'm going to show you the visuals. And then if you go back to page 2, then you'll see what we are giving. We give a whole set of possibilities for teachers to use as they discuss nuclear power and some of the implications of nuclear power. Then if you'll go to page 8, after the students do their research questions, they'll use these resources. And these are actual websites. So the students will have direct links to these websites, and they'll do their reading and researching on the website. Page 4, please. All right. So here are the 2 research questions. And the first research, well, first of all, you're given a whole scenario. And in this case, the students have your chief of staff or your local congresswoman in U.S. House of Representatives, and she wants you to do some research on nuclear power because she's got to make some decisions for her district. And while this isn't in the direct experience of students, it is the kind of thing that young people in college and even early career who work as interns would be beginning to do. I know at NEA we used to give research tasks to the interns. So the first thing is to look at the sources in terms of research. And first task, from the sources you have reviewed, summarize 3 major arguments that support and 3 major arguments that oppose the use of nuclear power. And, for each one, give, the argument and then where did it come from. So that's to me, that's pretty real life. in terms of what you would do on a research task. And then if you can go to the next page, and then that's just a sample of kind. And wait, can you go back to the other page and scroll to the bottom? Okay, now scroll to the bottom a little bit. Yes, okay, there we go. That's what I wanted to show. I love this. Evaluate the credibility of the arguments and evidence presented by these sources. Which of the sources are more trustworthy and why? Which of the sources warrant some skepticism because of bias? And next page. Or insufficient evidence. So again, this is very real life. This is what we want the kids to be able to do, and hopefully they would need to be able to do this in several types of courses in college. All right, now part 2 is they're given a chance to review their notes, and they kind of plan and revise their report. And they can't go back and change their answers, but they can see, hopefully, what they've put down before. So then they're told that they go back, to the congressperson's office with their notes, and the congressperson says, look, I don't have time to put this together. You're just going to have to write a press statement for me. So at that point, then the kids have to do a report, and there's the report guidelines there. So that's kind of the general piece. Then if you go to 11, all right. See, is that's 11? I think we need to move down. Let's try the next slide. Okay. All right. Here are scoring information for the research question, claim 4. And then go down again. And here is scoring information for the writing. It's considered a piece of argumentative text. And there's a whole 4-point scale in terms of writing. And you go down one more time. The first scoring looks at purpose and organization, and the second part of it looks at their use of evidence and elaboration in their writing. So that's the high school performance task, and in the interest of time, I've kind of jumped around to try to let you see a variety of different kinds of items and different kinds of things that we're asking kids to do.
Barb,
yes.
One question that came in that's germane to this is, and I've confessed that plans have shifted, and I'm not quite sure. How many performance tasks will occur with the summative assessment?
At this point, we're still deciding whether it's 1 or 2. But my guess is it will probably be 1.
And 1 in English and 1 in mathematics.
Yes, maybe 2, but probably 1. This is the situation that the test right now is running, and I don't have that piece of paper in front of me.
I can tell you for high school, it's combined English and math is approximately 8.5 hours. Right.
So I believe that the English Language Arts High School is 4.5 hours because of the long write. And the total time for the performance task is something like, right now, 170 minutes. So if you just ask the kids to do 1 performance task plus the 2 hours of computer adaptive, that's a huge amount of time, and that's not even the outward limits. Those are sort of the average time that we think it would take. So conceivably, some kids would take quite a bit more time on that. So what happens is, on one hand, people want these rich performance tasks, but on the other hand, they don't want to give up too much time to testing. And there's the kind of dilemma that I find we constantly struggle with in this. And do you want, as a teacher in the classroom, do you want time to do very complex, rigorous projects over time, or do you want a smaller piece of the summative assessment to get as close as you can to what goes on in the classroom? And I think there's a trade-off there in time. And so what we've tried to do, and it's still evolving, is develop tasks that can begin to give us evidence of what kids do in these situations, but stay within the time parameters that the policy people in the states have asked us to acknowledge, if that makes any sense to people.
Thanks, Barb. A couple of other questions that have come in. One question, a very interesting one, was will the 11th grade assessment be a requirement for high school graduation, or will it be in the future? That's actually an individual state decision. If you had asked me even a few months ago, I would have said I don't anticipate really that any of our states will think about using the Smarter Balanced exam as a high school exit exam, in large part because, as you've seen, it's quite rigorous. And we fully expect that many, many students will not be proficient in 2014-15. And so that would be a very tough thing to use as a high school exit exam. However, there was a recent paper from an education policy group in Washington that actually said there are a number of states. I don't remember the exact number, somewhere between 6 and 10, that are considering using either the Smarter Balanced exam or the other assessment is called PARC for high school exit. It's early days. I think as folks start to, as more things like these sample items come out, and as we do the pilot testing, that could potentially change. But I think that we are probably a number of years away from states wanting to tie these exams to high school exit, in particular because they haven't been teaching to the Common Core state standards for very long at all. And then there was let's see.
I'm looking at one, and while you're looking for others, it talks about key skills missing in the assignment about nuclear power. What we're looking at is whether kids orchestrate kind of a set of skills. And you're right. I mean, we could use about 6 different scoring rubrics on that product, and we could look in there for those other kinds of things. But right now, you know, the decision was made because each time you score it with a different kind of scoring guide, it requires resources. So, you know, the decision was to key in on this pulling together the ideas. But I see what you're saying. However, the other thing is, as you said, students need to know how to paraphrase, quote, and summarize. A lot of those are addressed in some of the CAT items, the computer adaptive test items, as more specifically there. So this is the big piece in terms of the writing, and I understand the concern, but it's not like we're not assessing those at all on the test. We're just not looking at them here.
A question was asked about the timing, and of course with the computer adaptive test, there's not a specific time. We do have ballparks because of course it is important for schools to think about the timing of the test, and how many computers they're going to need is dependent in part on how much time it takes. So we need to think about ballpark time estimates. But with the computer adaptive test, some kids may see, some kids may see 30 items to get to a point where the algorithm has zeroed in on their performance level, and some kids may need to see 27 items. And so the time is variable, plus the difference in the amount of time that it can take students to complete various pieces. The 11th grade test combined English and math. Our ballpark is about 8.5 hours, with about 4.5 of that coming from on the English side, so 4 hours on the math side. So an important thing to note is there's a lot of writing on the math exam. That's a big difference from what people are used to. Students have to explain their reasoning. There's a lot of constructed response on the math side of the test as well.
I see a question here too right now, Jackie. It says for the short constructed response items, I noticed it does not automatically score it. No, indeed, it doesn't. At some point, we hope we will be able to use AI scoring on this, but we can't use it yet because to do that would require training the computer based on the kinds of responses that we get to the items. So what we're trying to do, one of the things we're doing with the scoring is trying to make it as sustainable as possible for states once the funding is gone for the initial development, and how are states going to pay to continue to use the assessments in their states. And at this particular point in time, states have very limited funds for their education and their assessments and all of this. So we're trying to not put too heavy a burden on the individual states. If these were scored locally or at a state level, it would be a pretty big financial burden on the states at this particular point in time. That hopefully will change over time, and we'll begin to make adjustments, but if you read the economic policy pieces, you know that the states tend to be even slower than the nation to pull out of recession. So we're trying to give them all the support and make it as easy as possible for them to use the assessment without having to put too many, and they're still going to have to put their resources in, but without having them put too many of their resources in.
A great question about teacher preparation. The Common Core State Standards should change teacher preparation. What is asked, as you read the standards, I've never really had anybody who read the standards carefully not think that it was a significant shift in the way teachers are expected to teach. And came from a great meeting in one of our member states last week with teacher preparation and arts and sciences faculty, both on the English side and the math side, talking about how the standards would impact their work in teacher preparation and in first-year courses. And clearly, the teacher preparation faculty at that meeting were really thinking hard about how to help their students, both the pre-service students and the students, the in-service students for professional development, the sitting teachers, adjust to the rigors of the standards. There's differences in the kinds of academic content they're being asked to teach, and there's significant differences in pedagogy. One of the things we'll be able to do as a tool for teacher preparation programs is when we do the pilot test this spring, once those items that we use in the pilot test will be widely exposed, lots of people will have seen them. And so at least some of them, we'll have some that won't be as widely seen. But for those items that are widely seen, and I should say when we do pilot testing this spring, it will not be computer adaptive. It will look like a fixed form test. So we will have some forms that have been widely viewed that we will be able to release as essentially a sample test or a practice test. And along with these sample items, we think those will be really a useful tool to help teacher preparation faculty signal to their students the kinds of shifts that are signaled by the Common Core. So those will be things that we can distribute this spring after the pilot testing, and we've heard a lot from teacher prep people, teacher prep faculty. They'd really like more items at all the grade levels to show teacher preparation faculty to help. There's nothing like looking at these test items to help really bring home the ways in which the Common Core is a significant
and I would just, we're heading into the home stretch here, but I would just add that I think I mentioned earlier that we're going to have a digital library of resources, and we'll have some professional development resources as part of that library and formative assessment tasks. And they're probably one of the strongest tools for professional development and teachers developing deep understanding of what they're trying to accomplish and how to do it with kids is the use of formative assessments or formative assessment resources, and to sort of incorporate formative assessment into what they're doing in their classrooms. So I see that as a huge resource that's coming up. And in the meantime, as teachers look at the standards, even they don't have to wait for that, because they can look at the standards and say, well, what would I ask the kids in my class to do to show me that they've met that standard? And when they're doing that, are there other standards they can show me they've met at the same time? So I don't think it's terribly mysterious. And while I don't think that teachers have been in the habit of asking kids to do some of these things on a regular basis, I do not believe that they have no idea what it looks like when kids do it, or they don't understand, what it means to sort of explain how the author develops a character. So there are things within the reach of teachers, I think, coming to deeper understandings of how to help kids do those things is something that is probably best delivered in collaborative settings using a variety of resources, some of which are available. Well, actually, some are available online through various organizations, but we'll have some smarter balanced also. And I would also say that, never mind, I just saw that somebody else answered Peter's question.
Oh, good, yeah. So, well, I want to thank everyone. I especially want to thank Barb and Amy. This webinar has been recorded. It will be posted next week to the Smarter Balance website. Please go and take a look yourself at the sample items and at the content specifications. All of the documents that we've been referencing are available on the website, with the exception of the achievement level descriptors, and that will be available on our website shortly after Thanksgiving. So thank you, everyone, and trick or treat. Happy Halloween.
Thank you, everyone.